Thank you for browsing page 121. Today I want to talk about prepping versus overprepping. What exactly does that mean? Well, prepping a game is, of course, you're doing your background, your notes, and this primarily applies to you as the GM. It can apply to players, but not usually. So as the GM, I'm going ahead and I'm going to prepare, and I'm going to run a game on Avastin, which is a game I'm actually running right now. My players are based there with a Class C starport and a gas giant and all the fun stuff that Avastin has. And to prepare for the game, I read up on all the neighboring planets. We've been all over this area. This is in District 268, by the way, in the Spinward Marches. And it's been the focus of my campaign for a while now. And District 268's been the focus of my campaign for a long, long time. This is Traveler Map, by the way, that I'm using. If you want a way to prep and overprep, this is absolutely your best friend for Traveler. You can do all kinds of fun things with Traveler Map. You can look up individual planets. You can look up jump routes. You can look up based on era. There's all kinds of fun things to do with Traveler Map. I did a video on Traveler Map a few years ago. If there's any interest in me doing another one, please leave comments below. But today's not really about Traveler Map so much as it is about using it as a tool to prepare your game. You prepare your game by sitting down, reading up pertinent background information, and then stuff that's going to apply to your story. And your story, of course, drives the game. You expose the players to your story. You have your story ready to go. The players go ahead and then promptly change your story. But that's the whole nature of the beast. That's the fun, and that's what I find most enjoyable about being a GM, is putting a story in front of my players and then seeing them kind of twist it and shape it into their very own. I've played under GMs who felt that it was always on the players to develop a story and that they would run the background. I've never really agreed with that philosophy. I can see where people would use that philosophy, but that's never been my personal preference. I would prefer to put a story out there and then the players can do with it as they will. And by the way, that has happened where I've put a story out there and the players have decided for whatever reason not to follow it. It's something any good GM is going to prepare for. You got to be ready for the fact that they might not want to stop, go from Avastin on their jump 2 to go to Collis. I had a big game all set in Collis. They decided they didn't want to go to Collis. They wanted to go to Pavabit. I had to very quickly pull some stuff out of the air to run the game for that night, 3-hour session, based on Pavabit. Fortunately, I had read up on it a little bit since it's a neighbor and a rival of Collis. But that brings me to my prep versus overprep. Preparation is great. You need to have a lot of facts at hand as you are GMing a game. You probably have to be, at least in my experience, you have to be one of the most knowledgeable, if not the most knowledgeable person at the table about the game, how the game mechanics work, and the background and history and things like that. Not to say that you have to be an expert, because you don't. When I started playing D&D back in '80, I DM'd the very first day I heard of D&D, and we had an absolute blast. I did a total party kill in about a 2-hour game. It was a lot of fun, but I didn't know anything about what I was doing. It was just fun. And that's the whole point of this, preparation versus over-preparation. If you're going to over-prepare for a game, that's when you start running into burnout. You read every single thing you can about all these planets and their relationship over here, and you got the sword worlds in the area, and oh my gosh, who's over here and who's over there? And you just overwhelm yourself with all this knowledge. And before you know it, you're kind of tired of the game before you've even sat down to play it. And I have done this to myself. I actually have done it to a point where I've been prepping for, I'll just say Traveler, because this actually did happen in Traveler about a year ago. And I prepped, got it all ready and everything else. By the time it came to actually do the game, I had one player drop out because he had to work. And I said, well, we'll do Traveler next time, simply because I wanted the player there. That was the primary reason, but an important secondary reason was I was a little burnt on Traveler by the time I actually got to the table to play it. So I had over-prepared myself. We took a week, we played another game that week, and then when we came back to play Traveler the following week, I was refreshed and interested in running it again, and I had all my players back. So it's important to know your own limits and how you like to prep versus smashing your face into it and just over-preparing. My original Traveler GM, years and years ago, back in the early 80s, the guy who introduced me to this, lived, ate, and breathed Traveler all the time. He was always drawing up sector maps and always doodling with stuff. He had colored in some of the black and white pictures in some of the books, and just everything was Traveler for about the first year and a half that he was running it. And then about a year and a half into our campaign, which I was enjoying immensely as a player character, he ended the session. We had a lot of fun. He turned to me at the end of the session, handed me a stack of Traveler books and said, "I'm done. I don't want to play this game anymore." And I was a little taken aback. I didn't get it, but he had just burnt himself out. He did so much with Traveler, and just everything was Traveler, and that's all he talked about and thought about, that he burnt himself out, and he never really did come back. He played a little bit here and there once I took over as the GM, but he never really got his love for it back. He just burnt himself out. This particular individual tended to do that with games a lot. He would do it with comic books and other stuff we collected and played with even when we were little kids. He would just go so whole hog into it, and then he'd burn out and he'd be done. And that's prep, in my opinion, preparation versus over preparation. He knew so much about Traveler. He knew so much about all of the game system and all the alien races and all the little minutia that became boring to him. He just burnt himself out, didn't want to deal with it anymore. And that's the danger of over prepping. I have over prepped games. Every game I've run at some point, I've over prepped at some point. But you have to learn when to draw it back. For Traveler, my over preparation used to be I would learn all I could, and then as the players would come in and everything, we'd get started, I'd just do this massive info dump. All this great information I'd accumulated and I had in my head, and boom, 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 this was going on. I'd show them charts and maps. And I realized I was somewhat getting experienced as a DM, and I was realizing that my players weren't into it like I was. They didn't want that element of Traveler. They wanted their characters on their ship to get pertinent information and then to go from there. So I realized that myself as a GM, I had to draw back a little bit, and while I would still prepare the same way or even over prepare the same way, what I gave them had to be pared down to keep their interest. It's amazing, anybody who's DM'd or GM'd anything, you get that night where the player's eyes just kind of glaze over and they don't really engage. It just happens. Back in the early days of D&D, the main thing people used to do is dice stack. They would stack their dice into towers as high as they could go, and I would always hit the table and knock the dice towers down. And I told my players, I do consider that rude. I had worked on this. If you don't want to play, that's fine. We can stop now. But just to sit and dice stack because you're not bothering to engage with me, I found a little insulting. And I realized that maybe that's just me. Maybe other players, other GMs like it. I never liked dice stacking. I dislike phones at the table. The group I play with now, thank goodness, is very mature, and we don't see phones coming out at the table unless it's something important. If somebody gets an important text or phone call, of course, they just step away and they deal with it. I don't have people idly skimming the internet or whatever videos they want to watch while I'm trying to run a game. That's the modern equivalent in my mind of dice stacking. But I don't have to deal with that much. Yay! But going back to prep versus over prep, what I as a GM want to accomplish is current background knowledge on where we're going to be. So right now my campaign is based in Avastin. My players are becoming kind of movers and shakers in this somewhat backwater planet with a Class C starport that could become important. It's got some Class B starport neighbors, and this whole area is being considered for annexation into the Imperium. So they are in a situation where they can try to upgrade the starport by drawing in some outside investors and things like that. And this is the group, by the way, that went to piracy. So they went to piracy, made some money, then turned their money around and started putting it into legitimate businesses, as tends to happen. And now they're trying to bring in investors. And that's been a lot of fun. Been a lot more role-playing and a lot less combat than I'm used to, even in Traveler. But what I did with Avastin is I gave them all the information about Avastin. It's a very cold world and somewhat dry, and the atmosphere is tainted. It's a very tough place to live. Well, I didn't like that. I wanted Avastin to be more of a world. So what I did is I changed it. And I said that the survey information and the TAS information that has been disseminated about Avastin was tweaked to make the planet look less accommodating. The atmosphere has a taint. It's not as bad as TAS information has you believe. Whoever wrote that had an axe to grind and went ahead and exaggerated some of that. And that got me thinking about that being an important part of Traveler is, do you take everything exactly as it's written? Or did this one guy, have a bad day and write a bad review for a whole planet and, change the course of the planet's history because he said, well, the atmosphere is too tainted. You always have to wear a breathing mask. There's nowhere to live. Well, Avastin, I have ruled that has a breathable atmosphere down in the valleys of the planet. You can't go up very high, but you'll be out of the atmosphere. But down in the valleys, it actually has a decent climate. It is breathable, and you can raise livestock and otherwise have this world and try to get it to be self-supporting, and then try to attract outside interests. So my players have been working toward changing the information that's already been out there about Avastin and getting true current information into the TAS write-ups, and then once they have the information in the TAS, the idea is they'll bring investors. So that's really where we've been going. And this was my players for the most part. They settled on Avastin. I told them what the world was. They kind of made it clear how they were going to settle and everything else. And I thought, well, I'll just kind of change the UWP a little bit, Universal World Profile, and make it a little bit better, more suitable for colonization and things like that. Avastin's, by the way, a very interesting planet. But that was part of my overprep. I had known so much about Avastin as written that when it came time to actually run it, my players didn't care. They wanted to have a world they could do something with, and they made it clear that it was Avastin. And I'm not changing the planet for them. I'm simply writing a new element into my campaign. And I think that's an important thing for any GM to do. I'm not a slave versus to the Universal World Profile or anything. I want to build and expand on that. And like I said, we had a scout who was having a bad day. Maybe he lost the game a chance in Avastin Downport, or maybe he twisted a knee getting off the ship. I don't know. But either way, he wrote a negative review of the planet and said some stuff that he slightly over-exaggerated for whatever reason, and it kind of stuck, and it's halted the planet's development in a lot of ways. My players are currently working to undo that, and that's been a lot of fun. But that information came out of my overprep for the game because I was conversant. The players, when they started wanting to ask questions and really dive in and dial in on stuff, I was actually ready for a lot of those questions right off the top of my head. So that was a case where overprep on my part actually helped me run the game. I had never expected my players to be that interested in the planet's surface that they would actually ask details about how you could make living there more, accommodate more people living there. Would they need domes and things like that? And it was something I hadn't even considered going into the campaign, but I have since kind of worked on a little bit, and it's made a nice little new angle because they're trying to find out how they would change a JTAS write-up, how they would make the planet more enticing, how they would attract investors. And this is the group that went to piracy in like the third game. They've come around now, and they're going to be legitimate businessmen. It's been kind of fun. But that's just an example in my mind of preparation and over-preparation. The preparation was proper. I knew about the planet. I was all ready to go. But I had over-prepped in that I had read everything I could, and in my mind it was kind of set in stone. When my players started asking me really detailed questions about the planet, I was able to answer them, but I realized where they were taking it, and I used some of my over-prep knowledge, and I changed some stuff a little bit. It's just, I don't know, it's a fun thing to do. It was never where I thought my story was going to go, but it's where my players wanted the story to go, and that's what I'm doing. So there you have it. I'm against overprep as far as leading to burnout, but I am for background knowledge, as I prefer to think of it, instead of overprep, as part of the way of preparing for the game. I want to know why the Imperium is separated here to here. And there's a lot of mystery about that. We don't know exactly why, not in canon. We know it has to do with Andor and Kendori, which are two banned worlds that are there. And the Imperium has some interest in that area, primarily because of those, but we don't know why. We don't know why those planets are banned. So that could be something that I'll be finding myself developing a little bit, especially as the Fifth Frontier War starts spilling in a little bit to District 268. I've already had a few rumblings, but that's going to be my next overprep, is reading about the Fifth Frontier War again, which, by the way, I'm thoroughly enjoying. Having read about it 40 plus years ago at the beginning of my traveler days, and having a chance to reread it now and having it be changed a little bit here and there has been a lot of fun. But there you go. This is kind of a rambling one. I realize that, but it's prep versus over prep. And I'm actually an advocate for both as long as neither leads to burnout. I think they're both good. I like knowing my travel universe, and I like knowing that hivers are way across the universe and the players don't have to worry about that. But occasionally I'll bring up a hiver, or maybe there'll be a stray hiver ship in the area or something, just because it's fun. It can add to the story. But what I don't want to do is do an info dump on my players where their eyes glaze over and they start stacking dice, or the modern equivalent, looking at their phones. So there you have it. That's my 2 cents on prep versus over prep. Let me know what you think. Have you experienced burnout by over prepping a game? Or are you careful and really kind of do it out just right? This is different for everybody. Everybody has a different way of preparing for games and different way for telling stories. And if over prep is the only way you can do it, hey, go nuts. As long as you don't burn out, it's a great thing. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe to the video if you would. Take a look at the Patreon, see if you can help me out there. Tell your friends, still want to grow the channel. And let me know if you want more videos like this, where I'm just giving little insights into how I've GM'd or DM'd things over the years. I realized I just did one recently on D&D, and that's kind of what made me think about this one, because I started thinking about over-preparing. And I thought, well, okay, let's talk about over-preparation and the good and the bad. It's not always a bad thing. Burnout is a bad thing. And by the way, burnout is very real. When I hit burnout as the almost forever GM at my table, we play at least 40 games a year. That's a lot of prep in addition to the channel. I do hit some burnout now and again, and that's usually where my players get a phone call and they'll say, hey, you want to play Spellfire? And we'll play some Spellfire. So that's just kind of my way of coping with a little bit of burnout. But anyway, there you have it. Prep versus over prep. Let me know what you think. Comments below. I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you next time on page 121.